Welcome to Heaping Spoonful, a twice-monthly conversation with restaurateurs, chefs, growers, and others who have helped generate the legends associated with the eateries across the Mid-South. The team at Benny Keith is proud to sponsor this adventure with the goal of preserving the stories that have helped cultivate an amazing food scene across the Mid-South. So kick back and enjoy a Heaping Spoonful.
Hello, everybody out in podcast land. I'm your host, Kelly Bass, and I'm happy to welcome you to another episode of Heaping Spoonful, where I get a chance to visit with some of the key players on the Mid-South culinary scene. I'm a recovering journalist, I must admit, having spent 18 years as a newspaper guy. So I love getting to do these interviews. I reviewed restaurants for 2 Little Rock newspapers long before Yelp and TripAdvisor were a thing, and I'm also a foodie by nature and by choice. I'm the youngest of 3 kids. And frankly, my mom was burned out on cooking by the time I came along, so we ate out a lot. Our guest today will remember the original Browning's restaurant in the Heights neighborhood of Little Rock, and one of the early stories of my life was me falling over backward in my high chair at Browning's when I was 18 months old, and looking back on it, maybe that explains a lot about how I turned out. Today on Heaping Spoonful, I'm visiting with Capi Peck, co-owner, operator of Trio's Restaurant, and really so much more than that. So welcome, Capi.
Thank you, Kelly.
I'm glad you're here, and I appreciate you taking time to visit with the Heaping Spoonful audience. I've known you and a lot about you for decades, and let me say that we could record podcast episodes on a number of topics near and dear to you, from community activism on behalf of those who don't have a voice, to your love for the Little Rock School District in general and Howell High School, your alma mater in particular, to your leadership on the campaign to completely transform the historic Robinson Center, which is an amazing place now, thanks to the voters and a lot of money that made it fabulous, or your decision to run for city director and what that experience has been like, or even a little more on subject, your years on the city's advertising and promotions committee or leading the Arkansas Restaurant Association. But today we'll stick, generally speaking, to the topic most everyone around Little Rock, Arkansas associates with you, the restaurant business, and more specifically, Trio's Restaurant. So tell me, what led Brent Peterson, your longtime business and life partner, and you to open Trio's in 1986, and what were you doing at that point?
Well, Brent was actually working for Johnson & Johnson developing a wellness program, which is not unusual now, but in 86 it was sort of avant-garde. Yep. I was working for a small construction company and not terribly happy, and I always loved to cook. I grew up in the hotel, big foodie. I don't really love that word, but I guess I still am, of course, from a very, very young age. And I had catered a party, Brent and I did, for my sister, and we had such rave reviews that one person who ended up being our partner for 7 years said, "Man, you need to go into business.
Right.
Your food is so good. Why don't you open up a restaurant?" So that planted a seed, and I thought about it for a few days, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I called her and I said, "Are you serious?" And she said, "Yes. Let's do it together. I'll back you."
Ooh,
well, that was the magic word.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I didn't want to ask my family for money. So long story short, in September of 86, we opened Trio's. And at that point in time, we had 2 other partners. We bought them out after 7 years. And, that was 33 and a half years ago. And we had our best year ever last year. So we're going strong.
Isn't that fabulous? And in 1986, not many people identified as a foodie. And we will get into just in a little bit how you grew up as a foodie because of your family and their incredibly important seminal role in the Little Rock restaurant scene as served through a fabulous hotel. But I'll tell you, and I think you probably also agree, when, a lot of times on Heaping Spoonful, we talk to chefs and restaurateurs and say, what advice would you give someone who's thinking about opening a restaurant? And they often say, just because you're a good cook doesn't mean you need to open a restaurant, but you're the exception to that rule, or as you said, not only has it worked out for decades, but you had your best year ever last year, which is great.
We did. And so many people say, "Oh, wouldn't it be fun to have a restaurant? It'd be like entertaining your home every night." And it is fun. It is my passion, but it is one of the hardest jobs imaginable. Profit margins are very slim. Hours are long. You have to really understand how to connect with people, and numbers are very important.
Yeah.
So just because you're a good cook doesn't mean you can make money doing it.
No, and plenty of good chefs have proven that that's not,
Yes.
making money is not always their forte. Because the restaurant industry is a really volatile one. You and I could sit here and name many popular, extremely well-known restaurants that were thriving in 1986, but which are now long gone. And again, for the listeners around Little Rock, Arkansas, we're heard all over. Cajun's Wharf. Cajun's Wharf was the benchmark. When you came to town, you had to go to Cajun's.
Yes.
And now Cajun's Wharf doesn't exist for lots of really good reasons.
Yes.
The expense of maintaining that size space and all of that other stuff. But what would you say, when you look back, and again, you just had your best year ever, what have been the biggest keys to success for your team at Trios?
Listening to people, not just customers, but staff. We have an incredible longevity at Trios. I think we have 8 or 9 people with 20-plus years.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable. There are 3 people who have been there for 31-plus years.
That's crazy.
So, growing up in the hotel, what I really learned from my grandparents was how important it was to empower staff, to treat staff like family, and to treat customers like like family.
Sure.
And to be flexible. If something doesn't work, do something else. But to learn how to connect with people and to treat people like family, your guests and your staff. And I think that's the key to our success: listening to people and being responsive and being flexible.
Well, clearly, excuse me, if you have that number of folks have been with you 20 plus years and some have been there 31, you know how to treat your staff like you know how to treat your customers. And people, again, around Little Rock who've been here a while will realize that in 1986, Pavilion in the Park, which is the shopping complex where your restaurant is located, was brand new. And that was way farther west Little Rock feeling than it is today by a huge factor.
It was. In fact, when we decided to open a restaurant, I kind of grew up in the Heights neighborhood, and I thought, well, I want to be in the Heights. Well, that's difficult, parking, number one. And they were just building a Pavilion in the Park, and I took some friends out to see it, and they said, oh, man, that's just too far west. Now it's kind of like Midtown.
It really is.
That's the western frontier of Midtown. And we're the only original tenant that's still there. We've survived 5 different owners. It used to be purely retail. Now it's mostly office. And things have changed. They've really done a wonderful job keeping the building up. We've just added valet parking.
Oh, that's good.
Because now it is mostly offices, so people stay there all day. So listening to our customers, Little Rock is funny. People want to be able to drive up to the front door.
For sure.
It's not Chicago or New York where you'll walk a few blocks for a bite to eat.
That's true. And, it's a little hilly, and as people age, they just may not be comfortable negotiating those grades.
I think it's really stood the test of time, that building. Pope Stanley Wilcox designed it. I think it's still unique. I think it's a great venue. We have a private dining room there. We cater in the atrium, which is a lovely communal space with a glass roof. So it's really stood the test of time, and I can't imagine being anyplace else.
And Brent and you, again, are clearly innovators, and you were, the whole world long ago, your grandfather's time, were farm to table because that's how things were grown and served. Before we figured out you could freeze it and put it on a truck and drive it all across country. But you guys were doing that even before that was a term. And again, I can tell, and, I know from experience of dining at Trios for decades that, if it ain't broke, you're not fixing it. So Ashley and I had lunch with some friends yesterday before the rep, and we mentioned Trios, and they've only lived here 2 years. They hadn't been there yet, but they said, I heard they've got a dessert that's like raspberry. I said, yeah, it's very famous. And I said, and you just wait till it's strawberry shortcake season. And your spinach dip, and your shrimp enchiladas and other things that you have. But talk about this strawberry shortcake phenomenon and some of the other mainstays, because I literally, when I see you guys say it's strawberry shortcake time, we make a special trip to go have it.
It's unbelievable. A simple dessert that has basically 5 ingredients in it.
Yeah.
But the way we started serving that, a woman named Maddie Jackson, who has now passed on, she worked for my family at the hotel for 28 years. She came to work at Trios and was with me for 10 years, and she was a great Southern cook. She's the one that taught me how to make chicken and dumplings. She remembered the Peck's dressing. Nobody wrote things down.
No.
But she had that in her head because she was the salad person, the garde manger. And I guess it was a couple of years after she worked there. She said, what about strawberry shortcake? And I said, well, do you think it would sell? She said, oh, yeah. And so she taught me how to make it. She was very protective of her recipe. She wouldn't show anybody else. So for the first several years, I made all that shortcake dough. But it's nothing but pie crust, Arkansas berries, and whipped cream. It could not be more simple. Now, not everybody likes it. Some people want a sponge cake or a lady fingers or a biscuit. But this is Arkansas shortcake. It's just buttery, short pie crust with luscious local berries and whipped cream. And last year we bought 3,300 pounds of local berries.
And sold them all.
Sold them all.
And I bought some of them myself. And the thing is, we're recording this in early February of 2020, and it's going to be a while before that strawberry shortcake comes.
It'll be here before you know it.
I am literally salivating. I mean, I am. I'm glad no one can see this. They can only hear it.
Last year, it was the end of March. With global warming, we used to say berries will be in around Mother's Day, and then it was Easter. Now it's right after St. Patrick's Day.
I know, and it really happens with tomatoes, too. You used to never see any before 4th of July, and you certainly do now. Well, we hope the listeners of Heaping Spoonful are spread across the globe, and maybe someone extraterrestrial is listening off on another planet. But for some of those hearing us today, the name Peck might not mean a lot, but in Arkansas it sure does. I mean, first off, these same friends said, "Yeah, we go to the athletic club. It's on Sam Peck Road." I said, "Well, that was named for Capi's grandparents. Henrietta and Sam Peck operated one of Little Rock's legendary establishments, which was the Hotel Sam Peck on Capitol Avenue, not far from the state capitol." And you basically grew up there, right?
I did.
What was that like?
It was what a treat. I really think I had a unique childhood in the 50s and 60s here in Arkansas because I was exposed to so many things. Because people that traveled there, was right across from the federal building. Yep. The legislators were there always. Winthrop Rockefeller lived there for a while. What really put the hotel on the map was the crisis at Central High in 1957, because people like John Chancellor and Harry Reasoner, they all stayed there. And my grandparents lived there as well and paid such attention to detail.
Yeah.
Each room was different. My grandfather selected all the furnishings for each one. My father made a ceramic tile to identify each room. Each one was unique. Beautiful private dining spaces and fabulous food. Food you just did not see in a small southern town in the 50s, like Oysters Rockefeller, tableside Caesar salad. The first Caesar salad was served at the Sam Peck, and it was prepared tableside.
And that's because your grandparents...
I grew up eating that.
Yeah, your grandparents traveled, and, they went off to the other parts of the world and, France and other places and said, hey, wow, they're doing some cool stuff. We could do that because, again, those of us on the backside of... I actually remember the hotel, but on the backside of it, think of it as a hotel, but it also, again, they introduced Little Rock to French cuisine and some of the finer things in life, and it's important, again, to realize where it was. And as you said, that 57 crisis, which was such a black mark on Little Rock, that did have its good side, and that was it introduced a lot of people from outside of Little Rock to Little Rock and to the hotel, the Sam Peck.
Yes.
That's really great. What did you learn from your grandparents about the restaurant business and about customer service and hospitality?
My grandparents lived in the hotel, so my grandmother was downstairs at 6 a.m. every morning, passing out bran muffins, pouring coffee, calling people by name. My grandfather was in the kitchen every night, tasting, creating. He had a fabulous palate. I learned how to observe. I became a very good listener. I developed my people skills more than anything. Now, would my grandfather have been happy that I'd gone into the restaurant business? I don't know. My grandmother tried to talk me out of it, as did my father. Yeah. They both said, "Oh, Capi, the hardest part of the hotel business was the restaurant end of it. People will steal from you. You won't make any money. You have to." They really just tried to discourage me, but they both lived to see me be successful, and they were super proud.
That's great. Again, you've mentioned these already, but as I looked into the history of the Hotel Sam Peck, of course, as you said, our Winthrop Rockefeller, the son of the oil baron, and amazingly a man who settled in Arkansas of all places and became our governor, stayed there for 2 years while he was having his home built on top of Petit Jean Mountain, which is crazy. And then, and I read this too, because the internet will let you do research. It was that not only did John Chancellor stay there, but you were with your grandmother in New York City, and the legendary NBC journalist spotted your grandmother and recognized her, right?
Yes. We were standing in line to go to the theater. This was my first trip to New York. I was 12 or 13, and actually tapped my grandmother, who I called on the shoulder, and said, "Miss Peck, I don't know if you'll remember me." Leah's not going to remember John Chancellor. Yeah. But she had that, she was an amazing, she was the face of the hotel.
Right.
My grandfather was really the creative person, but he was rather more behind the scenes. But my grandmother was so gracious and elegant and such a people person. You had to remember her.
That's great. But again, yeah, you might not remember me. I've only watched you on the news pretty much every day of my life.
Yeah.
But and again, those of us who've been around Little Rock and know the restaurant scene here, so much ties back to Jacques and Suzanne's, which was the French-focused restaurant that was on top of the bank building. But that really probably included customers who trained their palates on that kind of food at your grandfather and grandmother's hotel.
I mean, whether it was Julia, the way I learned to cook was hanging out in the kitchen and reading every word of Julia Child's Mastering the Art of French Cooking, Volume 1 and 2.
Yeah.
In fact, we have a dish on our menu right now, a classic boeuf bourguignon that's Julia's recipe that takes forever to make, but they serve that at the hotel, and chicken estragon, and like I said, the oysters Rockefeller, very French food. And it's funny you mentioned Jacques and Suzanne, because when they were thinking about opening that restaurant, they asked my grandmother, because at the time the Sam Peck was the best place to eat in the state, and if she thought that could make a go of it. She said, "I just don't think that you'll ever make it here. I don't think there are that many people that want, classic French cuisine." Well, boy, was she wrong.
Well, they had a free rent situation up there too, which I think at the end of 10 years, it became financially not unfeasible. Of course, they all ran off to do other great things.
Yeah, look what it spawned.
Oh, yeah. Again, there's another podcast. All right. Well, listen, let's take a short break here on Heaping Spoonful. We appreciate you listening, and we'll be right back with Capi Peck of Trios.
I hope you're enjoying this episode of Heaping Spoonful. We at Benny Keith Foods enjoy talking about the food scene almost as much as we enjoy providing the top quality ingredients that help restaurateurs and chefs across the Mid-South create their magic. Now let's dive even deeper into the culinary world with your host, Kelly Bass.
All right, welcome back to Heaping Spoonful. Again, we're visiting with Capi Peck, member of the Little Rock City Board of Directors, community activist, and as she's best known to most, the co-owner and operator of Trios Restaurant, which is really a pillar on the Little Rock dining scene since 1986. Capi, the success of Trios, as we've already established, is a rarity in the fickle restaurant business, but you had another venture called Capi's, right, that didn't make it. Tell our listeners about that project, how it came to be, and what, Brenton, you learned from that.
Kelly, I never really wanted to open another restaurant. I'm a one-restaurant kind of person. I'm so hands-on, but I was talked into it after some very persistent people that were developing a new center truly out west. And I've always loved tapas, always loved small plates. We didn't really have a restaurant like that here in Little Rock. And so I fell under their spell and said, okay, let's go for it. Well, that was in 2007. I think we opened in 2008, right when the recession hit.
Oh, yeah.
And
hit
I think
hard.
Every restaurant really was hit hard. So we struggled. We were sort of on the backside of the center. It was sort of tucked away. It was we had a okay first year. The second year we struggled. Then we tried to reinvent ourselves and become a Nuevo Latino restaurant. That didn't stick either. And I struggled constantly with customers not being happy that I wasn't at Trios and staff feeling like I wasn't at the helm there, going back and forth. And we finally decided just before the beginning of the third year to call it quits. It was lost some money.
But again,
learned a lesson.
I understand. And again, though, just as your grandparents' restaurant within their hotel reflected their travels, that reflected some of your travels and what you knew to be cutting edge trends in the restaurant scene. That since what years was that you had that restaurant?
2008, 9.
Oh, that's right. You just said 8. Yeah. Well, you know what? 10 years later, 12 years later, those themes are much more fleshed out in restaurants around the country and even in Little Rock. But again, that a learning experience. And and we both have friends who have multiple locations, and some of them are very much the face of their restaurant. And I've said, how do you can't be both places at once? How do you keep people happy? Because a lot of, I hope folks realize that and I may be speaking too strongly, the cult of personality of the owner-operator is really an important part, and being seen on the floor. And as you said, Trios has tons of regulars. I love to come to lunch on a Friday at Trios because sometimes the men are definitely outrepresented by the women, many of whom are having a glass of Chardonnay and they've just played tennis. And so I know I'm overgeneralizing, but I bet most days you could probably name 75% of the people in the restaurant.
I could.
And the fact that you can is really important to them. So as we said when we opened this episode, we could talk for hours about things you're passionate about that aren't connected to your career as a restaurateur, but there's one that combines your love of and knowledge of food with your passion for helping others, and that's called Cooking Matters. So tell our listeners about that program, which is really impressive.
It's part of the Arkansas Hunger Relief Alliance. There's several different programs, No Kid Hungry, which I'm very involved with as well. And Cooking Matters is a curriculum. It's a 6-class series that teaches how to cook healthy food on a budget quickly. And it's specifically for low-income families that want to learn how to read labels in a grocery store and cook something nutritious in 30 minutes or less. So it's really educational. It's a free class that the Hunger Relief Alliance says. We teach it in schools and libraries and gymnasiums and restaurants. We've taught to the OK program at the City of Little Rock. I taught the first Spanish language class, and it equips the people there's a kids class and an adults class and a family class, how to cook, because cooking at home is becoming a lost art. Everybody's so used to just going out or driving through, grabbing fast food, that it can be a little daunting to go into a grocery store and, learn how to shop. So their basic things are taught, like how do you break down a chicken?
Right.
How do you read a food label? How do you? What's all this nutritional information on the back? How do you switch from whole grains if you really want to start eating more healthy? How do you start eating less sugar? How do you introduce more vegetables and fruits into your life?
And keep it affordable.
Yeah. That's the main thing.
Right.
So it's super rewarding, and it's the Alliance does so much good work. We still have one of the highest rates in the nation of childhood hunger. 1 out of every 4 children in the state are hungry, don't have enough to eat.
And you talk about it hard to focus on school when your stomach's growling. You don't know where your next
I can't focus on my work if I skip breakfast.
I know. And, here we are. Luckily, our schools have learned that, and we have some programs where usually the 1 or 2 nutritious meals that some kids get is at school, but again, trying to keep them more nutritious. We also know that kids learn. I drink unsweetened iced tea because that's what my mother served. I eat certain things because that's what my mother served. And if you get kids, their parents cooking nutritiously with fresh ingredients, then they're likely to do the same. And as you said, you have kids classes too, so that's great. One thing, and I've told you this before, when I'm going to an event, and I go to lots of them, and I'll drive up and I see the Trios van outside, I know everything's going to be okay. And I know you've got a huge catering operation. So, I really have to ask you, how do you and your team manage to run a fairly large and always bustling restaurant and operate such a massive catering operation? I think catering's got to be an important revenue stream.
It is. It's about 18 to 20% of our business.
Yeah.
Of course, there's some seasonal fluctuation there. And, I think we do that because that's really how I started. I got noticed by this friend because I'd catered a party. And as I said earlier, I love small plates. That's the way I like to eat, grazing. I'd much rather order 3 or 4 things from the appetizer category and a salad and a dessert and skip the entree, because
I do the same thing.
I can get so much more variety that way. And so I love to we excel at heavy hors d'oeuvres, but we do breakfast, lunch, and dinners. We cater for 500 and we cater for 8. And I think the key to being able to do that is my solid staff. Stephanie's the catering coordinator. She's my partner. She's been there for 32 years.
Yeah.
And this is sort of her role, whether it's a wedding reception or a bar mitzvah or a corporate luncheon. We go off-site. We have a private dining room. We've got a couple of vans now and just a great, great staff. One of the gentlemen that works 99% of the parties, he's only worked for me for 28 years.
Yeah, he's the new guy.
Yeah.
No, well, it is good, and again, yours and some other brands around town. When you see that's who's taking care of the food, it's going to be good, and so that makes me very happy. Again, we talked about the fact that just being a good cook does not necessarily equate to success in the restaurant business. In your case, it did, but because you paid a whole lot of attention to the stuff beyond the cooking. But what would you say have been kind of your biggest breaks along the way that have helped make Trios successful?
Wow. I just, I think it just comes down to having a lot of perseverance and just maintaining a passion for what we do. I can remember maybe really just a handful of times where I was approaching burnout, but I always make sure I take time to go on a great trip, carve out a little time for myself to get some inspiration and get a little R&R to keep things fresh and to keep things interesting. Another reason I think that maybe not a break, but has prevented burnout is our menu changes all the time.
Right.
I mean, it is a global menu. It's pretty eclectic. People say, well, what kind of food do you serve at Trios? I don't even know what to say. New American doesn't describe it. I mean, we've got a great Thai dish on the menu right now. We have a very classic beef bourguignon right now. We have Mexican food. We have Creole food. I don't even know how to answer that question. But break, I don't know that we've had a break. We've had a couple of tough years during the recession, but we just kept plugging at it.
Right.
And I think being hands-on, and the best advice I ever got from anyone was after we closed Capi's, a friend said, you just got to mine the diamonds in your own backyard.
Yeah.
Just look at what you have here and just work to make it perfect and grow within these 4 walls. And, well, of course, broader than 4 walls and expand the catering.
Right, yeah. Yeah, well, that's all good points. I would think maybe the fact that West Little Rock's grown up around you a little bit. You always have established neighborhoods nearby. You've got River Ridge and you've got
Foxcroft and Robin Leewood.
Mm-hmm. But people are a lot more used to driving that stretch of Cantrell than they were in 1986.
That's true. That's true.
And again, I just think the consistency of it and the fact that you've got such a great team that if you do go away for a week, I'm sure you can stay checked in, but things are going to be okay.
Yes, yeah.
Which is great. Well, listen, thank you so much, Capi, for taking time to visit with me today on Heaping Spoonful, and we hope all of you out in podcast land have enjoyed the conversation. And come back, and we'll try to get about 2 of these up a month, so keep listening, and we thank you. Goodbye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Heaping Spoonful. On behalf of all of us at Benny Keith Foods, Mid-South Division, please know how much we love connecting you with the legends of the culinary scene and their unique stories. I look forward to the next time we can offer you another Heaping Spoonful.